The road to revolution. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how the United States was formed, how the colonists decided to declare their independence in 1776, and what were the actions by the British and the British government, British military, that led the colonists to become so angry that they felt they needed to declare that independence. Let's start with 1763. The Proclamation of 1763 was issued by Parliament right after the end of the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War was between, on one side, the French and Indians versus the British and the colonists. And what it ultimately came down to was the French had come down south from Canada. They were trying to occupy the area west of the Appalachian Mountains. Native Americans fought with the French because they felt the French would be more friendly to Native American interests. They were afraid that the colonists and the British were going to continue to push west and west and west as more and more colonists arrived. It ended up being won by the British and the colonists, and there was a big debate, a big divide between the British and the colonists after the French and Indian War. The British felt that they'd won the war, the French were going to be gone. The British main interest was getting that land for the British Empire. They felt they'd accomplished that. It didn't really bother the British that the Native Americans occupied the area west of the Appalachian Mountains. They weren't going to bother the Native Americans at that time. And in fact, they didn't want the colonists to go west of the mountains because they knew that if the colonists went west, that would mean conflict. And conflict between the colonists and the Native Americans would require, due to the social contract, the British to come in and fight and support the colonists. They didn't want to spend the money to do that. The war had already been costly enough. Because war costs money, the British didn't want to spend any more money. The colonists, though, had a problem. People had been living here as colonists for a couple of hundred years at this point, 150 years, and more, the colonists were running out of room. They had the space between the mountains and the shore, the Atlantic Ocean, up from Massachusetts down to South Carolina and even into Georgia, and they were running out of room. So colonists pushed west. They wanted to push west this direction, which created conflict with the Native Americans. So Parliament passed the Proclamation of 1763. It was a law, and it said that no colonist could move west of those mountains. The colonists felt they had just fought a war to gain that land, and the colonists fought, bled, and died in that war, and they were extremely angry at the idea of being told now by the British, you fought and died for this war, you fought and died for this land, but now we're not going to let you have it. It's going to be a royal possession, but we don't want you going in there. That was a major point of conflict. Next. Because the war had been so expensive, the British stepped up their efforts on taxation. They needed more money. The British Empire, remember, is not just in America. It also extended to India and other parts of the world. They were still expanding, and it costs money to run an empire. So the British come in with the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was a tax on all official documents. If you're getting a birth certificate, a marriage license, you're transferring land and selling it from one person to another, all of those things were a public document. Those documents all were taxed by the British Crown. The colonists got extremely angry about this. They created a Stamp Act Congress in which they organized and tried to resist the Stamp Act. People got together from all the different colonies. They talked about the British and the problems that the British were causing, and they started this discussion about revolution. Benjamin Franklin created the very famous Join or Die cartoon that we will look at, in which he suggested all the states need to stand together and create a united government of the colonies so that they could stand firm against the British. In addition to the Stamp Act, and there were others beyond this, but we're going to talk now about the tea tax. The tea tax, tea was the coffee of the day. Everyone drank tea. It was the cultural staple. Every afternoon, people would take a break, they'd have tea, some would have it in the morning. So tea was very expensive because it came from the West Indies. It was also extremely popular and in very high demand. The British knew that by passing the Tea Act, they were going to be supporting their own company, the East India Tea Company, and the tea company would have an exclusive right to sell teas to the colonies. This meant the colonists wouldn't be able to shop around for a better price. They would have to buy tea from the British company, and if they didn't, they wouldn't have tea. This angered the colonists very much. So, a group organized by Samuel Adams in Boston, called the Sons of Liberty, dressed up as Native Americans, and they went on the boats of the tea company. They took the tea, they threw it overboard. This was an act of civil disobedience. It violated the law, but it was a protest. They were determined not to pay the tea tax, and they were going to send a clear message to Parliament that you can't decide what our prices are for tea. You can't force us to buy it from this company if this company is going to charge a higher rate. Some women around the colonies also organized boycotts of tea to get people to stop drinking tea, at least as long as the Tea Act was in place. So taxation without representation became a major theme of the revolution. That was the slogan that they would chant and call, no taxation without representation. If you're going to tax us, at a minimum, we have to have a voice in government. This is a democracy. People should have rights. This idea, this notion again of self-government. This notion that the social contract gives everyone rights to life, liberty, and property. Colonists were beginning to feel that their property was unfairly being taken through taxation, that their lives were being unfairly taken through abuses of power, such as those in the Boston Massacre. And so the colonists also protested that they had no vote in Parliament. Parliament was the government of the lawmaking body of Great Britain. You had the king on one hand, Parliament on the other. The king wasn't listening to any of the colonists' protests and complaints. Parliament was doing whatever it wanted, raising taxes on the colonists, not giving colonists an opportunity to defend themselves in court, forcing colonists who were being tried into admiralty courts that were held by a British judge and a British jury, or no jury at all. So there was no jury of their peers. The colonists had no chance at a fair trial because they were being tried by the British, and only the British opinion was listened to. So all of these things added up to the point where in 1776 the colonists decided in the Second Continental Congress to go ahead and ask a young scholar, Thomas Jefferson, to write the Declaration of Independence, and we will pick up there a little bit later.